We just finished talking about the formal criminal justice system, but in a perfect world, that's how the criminal process, the criminal justice process would flow. A case would move through from the cops to the courts to corrections, but not all cases go through this. As a matter of fact, as I alluded to in the last lecture, 90 to 95% of the cases settle or resolve in a plea bargain stage, which could happen at any time. And there are other factors that come into play. So some don't even get to the actual arrest. They may be under investigation, and then something happens like cooperation. An individual can become a confidential informant for law enforcement, and it's under the agreement that they won't be charged. You actually need the consent of the prosecutor to go that route. And just as you're going to hear, like the key component through this between the law enforcement and in the courts is prosecutor is king or queen. And you'll see that they have a tremendous amount of power. And I'll show you a video when we get to the court system, when we talk about the prosecutors. So, cooperation. Someone can get right involved working with the prosecutor or the law enforcement agents to, break other crime or get, bigger fish in the pot. If they've picked up somebody who had a, drug possession, they want to know where it came from. So they want the next, the bigger step up, the bigger fish. Plea bargaining is another tool where a person would plead guilty for something, for a lenient sentence or a lesser crime. It does have its dangerous effects, I think. I'll ask why might one want to plea bargain when the district attorney has the burden of proof to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt? We'll talk more about that. Some folks just, I want to get it done. I want to get it over with. I want to avoid any criminal record. I mean, that could be part of the plea deal. The plea deal is they don't plead to something that's a crime. They don't end up in jail. Those are on the parts of the defendant, why they would accept a plea bargain. Other driving forces behind this: judicial economy. Money, taxpayer dollars, to save those resources for the more serious type crimes. And all of this is up to the discretion of the prosecutor. And our criminal justice system, I love how the book describes. I've never heard it described this way. I'm going to actually use it in my work, no, not just my teachings. It's like a wedding cake, and it's true. You have the high level crimes, the ones that get all of the attention. O.J. Simpson, right? Bernie Madoff, he was the fellow who robbed Americans in a very elaborate Ponzi scheme. James Holmes, the individual who was involved in the shooting in Colorado during the Batman movie. Level 1. And these folks usually go quite far in their cases. OJ went all the way to trial. Bernie Madoff, it was federally charged. He ultimately took a deal, but it took a long time to get there. And James Holmes, also after a long, drawn-out process, the case was resolved without having to go to a trial. Level 2 is the next serious felonies down. Burglaries, rapes, robberies, they get, and some deaths or homicides, they get full attention. It can go, trial or plea. Usually they're repeat offenders. The conduct that's involved usually is violent or involves a weapon of some sort, and they ultimately end up in jail or prison in the outcome if they're found guilty. Level 3 is our serious, but they're less offensive. They don't generally involve a repeat offender. These are first-time offenders, might be assaults, some domestic violence type cases, and these will result in a plea bargain 99% of the time. And they don't always end up in jail. Most of them are, conditions they have to follow or doing some sort of probation offense. Then we have our misdemeanors, which is, and I'll lump our little violations and infractions in there too. These are low-level courts that handle, and this is our assembly line, in and out, highly plea bargained, rarely goes to trial, and usually it's some sort of fine or community service, and in some cases a dismissal. Key point, the smallest number of cases will receive the most public attention, and those will be our celebrated cases. So here's a question that I pose while we look at a photo of the wedding cake. Think of it like this. Is there equal justice under the law? And can everyone expect to get his or her day in court? Just hearing that bit of information. Do you have another alternative to a plea bargain? Actually, the only other alternative to a plea bargain is a trial. So what if all cases were settled with the formal trial rather than a plea bargain? Cases, if they're already backed up, if every single case had to be tried, that's a lot of time, that's a lot of resources. That doesn't need to happen. So the informal process is what takes place most of the time. There's some discussions, there's some resolution, and only the most serious crimes or those celebrated crimes see their day in court or go the distance down that formal criminal process. So not surprisingly, due to the complex nature of the criminal justice system, there are several different perspectives regarding goals. The goals, the purposes, and the direction of the criminal justice system. And these 6 items we're going to talk about, I'm going to give a little bit more background on each one, are what seem to be or are perspectives or driving force behind the criminal justice system. I've had to deal with every single one of these in some aspect. So let's talk about them. Crime control. Tough on crime, right? Tough on crime. That's one view. We're going to hand down tough sanctions to deter those repeat offenders. And if that is the direction, the full force direction on that perspective, it's super expensive. You don't want to toss, cases due to police error, right? This is what can happen. They want these folks who want crime control. They don't want cases that are tossed out because the police made a mistake, right? They did when they say mistake or error, like they've infringed on somebody's rights, like, oops, we didn't mean to search your vehicle without your consent. Want profiling. These folks want profiling, especially at airports. Think about this. Border Patrol can stop a vehicle within 100 miles of the border. It's part of the Homeland Security under the Patriots Act. And without the fancy term is probable cause, without any reasonable basis for the stop. They can just stop vehicles within 100 miles of the border, which makes a very big net for us in northern New York, being so close to the Canadian border. That goes all the way down nearly to Albany and across to Syracuse. Big net. So the purpose behind this is to deter crime through the application of punishment. The system isn't equipped to treat people, rather investigate, apprehend, and punish. That's the crime control perspective. Rehabilitation perspective, helping and caring for people who can't manage themselves, is the driving force behind this. Crime is an expression of frustration and anger created by social inequality and can be controlled by giving people the means to improve their lifestyles. So punishment, their view is punishment can't deter crime. Violence, racism, poverty, these are any other blocked opportunities that cause these things to cause crime to happen, or the result of criminals to behave in a criminal manner, or people, that's criminals, people to behave in a criminal matter. I referenced James Holmes. Let's think about him. If you're familiar with the case, I think the book actually has a little blurb about this case. He's the individual who went in Colorado during the Batman movie and opened fire with rifles, killing 12 people. And it was determined that he had severe mental health problems, mental illness. So do we treat or do we punish? Right? Under this view, criminals are society's victims. Helping others is the American way. Criminals can be treated within the system. And I believe that is what occurred in Mr. Holmes' case, is there was a determination that he would be put into a mental health facility. The due process perspective. This is the basic constitutional rights that we are afforded under the Constitution, especially a criminal defendant in a criminal proceeding, and all of the requirements that are set forth for a fair trial. And I will say, out of our 10 commandments, nearly half of them relate to this process. The Fourth Amendment is a legal search. The Fifth is the right to remain silent. Sixth is your right to counsel and a right to a jury. The Eighth is your the right to be treated humane. No cruel and unusual punishment is the Eighth Amendment. And these are for every person under the Constitution. Preserving these ideas is more important than punishment, and decisions that are made must be scrutinized under our due process. And all defendants must be treated fairly regardless of their race, sex, religion, economic status, and ethnicity. Another perspective is the non-intervention perspective. Less is better. These are the less is better folks. Least intrusive treatment possible. Regardless if the system is meant to punish or treat people, the effects will be harmful and have long-term effects. So that's the view here. One of the long-term effects that is cited is the stigma to have a criminal record, or a stigma that kind of puts them in, a criminal way of life. Once one is in the criminal justice system, like I said, you can have a criminal record. If, depending on the crime, if it's a sex offense, you have to the defendant has to register as a sex offender. And there's no proof that it actually deters any repeat offense. In some states, it affects voting rights. It affects, depending on the crime, driver's license, whether you can get one or be suspended. You can't get a job sometimes. We don't have licensing options. Those, in a nursing position, you're required to have a license. You might need a license to carry a certain kind of weapon. You can't get a hunting license under some convictions. So, their solution is pretrial diversion. Programs with non-punitive, community-based alternatives, instead of having the more intrusive forms of punishment like jail or prison. And of course, this view is stemmed towards non-violent type crimes in this instance, so people can not have that stigma attached to them, or into having the stigma is locked into people having a criminal way of life. The next one is our equal justice perspective. All people should be treated equally before the law, right? This is best achieved through individual direction. So, for example, two different people are stopped. Let's take a traffic infraction. Two different people are stopped, because this happens a lot. Two people are stopped for a traffic infraction by a law enforcement agent. Same law enforcement agent. And in one instance, he lets one go without a ticket, and in the other one, they get a ticket, right? So rather than individual discretion, everybody should be treated the same. Or two people convicted of the same crime should receive the same sentence. Why does one person get probation and one person gets jail when they can commit the same misdemeanor offense? So the point is, based on that current behavior, let me rephrase that for a minute. The other point that the equal justice perspective has is that it must be based on any punishment received or any decision to let somebody go or not go, but more importantly, towards the sentence they receive. Is the court who imposes the sentence must base that sentence on the person's current behavior. When they base their decision on past behavior, they've already been punished for that. And, the potential future crimes is unknown, whether the offender would offend or not. So if two people are convicted of the same crime, they receive the same sentence, and that sentence is based on what the current behavior is. They want to prevent inconsistent treatment because it produces disrespect for the system, and it does, because I've seen it, I've witnessed it. Reduces individual discretion, so there's less control. And a just system needs to have a nice standard set of instructions that we follow. 1, 2, 3, 4, nicely and laid out. And that is the equal justice perspective. We got 2 more to go. The restorative justice perspective. This advocates peaceful solutions and mediation rather than threats of punishment, right? They want to reintegrate individuals with society and let them share their experience. And hopefully the sharing of that experience, deters other folks from engaging in that conduct. The punishment they think is self-defeating, in that nobody benefits from the criminal's aspect, or even a victim's aspect of what happened. It's like the victim is the victim, but if the victim got to say what their perspective was, or what happened to them, or reflect on what happened, you can share that with others, and hopefully crime would be prevented. Overall, the justices, according to the restorative justice perspective, the justice system must become more humane. We must learn from each other, and whether that is from, a criminal defendant who is reflecting on their behavior, or the victim is reflecting on either their role or how the crime has affected their life, could be shared. And that could be the basis of the judicial system becoming more humane. And an overall perspectives on perspective, because these are all out there, all trying to play a role or some aspect. But think about it. There's no single one that is inherently just. We have gone from the crime control, that was the whole point of setting up this system way back when, to a more equal justice model. But all of these kind of play a role. Rehabilitation, due process for sure, and other ways of trying to assist an individual rather than punish them. So some things to think about. Where might you fall in this role of perspectives? Actually, I think this is one of the paper topics. So if you choose it, it'd be interesting to hear how you feel about it.